He traveled with the hero party, just an ordinary man with the strange ability to copy their skills. By the end of their journey, he was strong enough to defeat the Demon King himself, yet he handed the glory to his friend. Now he's left the spotlight behind and moved to the dangerous frontier, dreaming of building a quiet village for him and his companions. But the borderlands don't welcome peace. Monsters gather, mysteries awaken, and his copied power grows stronger than ever. What happens when a nobody tries to live freely after surpassing every hero alive? Let's find out. This story begins with the protagonist, Cray, fiercely battling a demon lord. His opponent, dying, exclaimed with a grin. It couldn't be that he, the demon lord, had been defeated by some unknown warrior. He asked him what his name was. The protagonist assumed a fighting stance, told him his name, and added that he was a porter in the hero's party, a villager. With his last breath, the demon lord spoke regretfully. He thought he had been defeated by a great holy knight, but he turned out to be a simple villager. How funny. MC asked him if he had anything else to say. The demon replied, yes. The protagonist looked at him and said he understood. With these words, the protagonist swung his sword and put an end to the Demon King once and for all. Yuck, lying on the ground, looked at the fallen demon in surprise and said, he defeated the demon lord himself? Cray happily noted that the prince had regained consciousness and exclaimed, that's very good. Yuck asked him in bewilderment, he defeated this great adversary? MC sheepishly replied, something like that. He staggered and added, just a little more, and he'll pass out. The protagonist clanked his sword, and Yuck noted in amazement, is that his holy sword, Aronsvale? The protagonist caught himself and replied, yes, forgive him. His sword was broken, so he took this one without asking. The prince stood up and asked him in surprise, how did he do that? A holy sword after all. No one can touch it except members of the royal family. Could he, Cray, be his illegitimate brother? The protagonist chuckled. Of course. At that moment, the sword tore itself from MC's hands and moved into the prince's. Yuck watched in surprise as the sword returned to its sheath. The protagonist, looking in disbelief at his smoking hands, remarked that the holy sword truly did have a will of its own. It had made an exception for the sake of defeating the demon lord. The protagonist looked at the prince and added that 3 of the 4 heavenly kings had already fallen, so their army could be considered finished. Yuck agreed with him, and besides, the main threat was the demon lord's own skill. It was an ability that allowed him to strengthen demons and monsters, as well as control them. The prince continued, now that this skill was lost, no one could inherit the demon lord's throne. They had finally won. As the allies returned, Yuck spoke to the protagonist. This is the end of their journey to overthrow the demon lord. It's almost sad that it all ended so quickly, isn't it? The protagonist indignantly responded, oh, come on, he almost died. The prince agreed and declared he single-handedly defeated the lord. When the royal prophet advised him to take a simple village boy with him on his journey, frankly, he doubted it. But the prophecy was right. He is the true hero, Cray. The protagonist looked at him in bewilderment. The prince continued, when they return, he'll be declared a hero. He's advising him to start writing a speech right now. The protagonist exclaimed in amazement. What advice is he giving him? Yuck, ignoring his indignation, said, well, we need to raise Flora and Teritas. Cray indignantly shouted at him, he won't make any speeches. A few days later, the king of his kingdom, Altonia, named Zeldo, summoned his son and solemnly addressed him and his comrades. He spoke up, their victory over the demon lord, a great feat. Chancellor Gig Conrad exclaimed in surprise, come on, he actually defeated him. The protagonist, hearing his words, thought Yuck had said the chancellor was his worst enemy. It was written all over his face. Gig smiled and exclaimed, this is simply incredible. They must present appropriate rewards to all members of the hero's party. He turned to Flora and Teritas, noting that he thought they had also performed admirably. The protagonist read the chancellor's thoughts. If third Prince Yuck were to become the hero who destroyed the demon lord, then first Prince Alton's succession to the throne would be jeopardized. But no matter, the main thing was to frame the victory so that someone other than Yuck was responsible. He couldn't defeat him alone anyway. He simply needed to attribute some of the credit to one of his comrades. The protagonist was outraged by the chancellor's evil plan. Flora told him no. To her deep regret, she had been of no use in the battle with the overlord. Teritas also admitted he was in the same situation. He added that he had been knocked out rather quickly, so he, too, had been unable to do anything. The chancellor was dissatisfied with their answers. Zeldo exclaimed in surprise, impossible. Then who defeated him? Yuck asked the king's permission to proclaim the hero who had defeated the sworn enemy of all humanity, the demon lord. At that moment, the protagonist spoke up. It was none other than His Highness Yuck. The prince turned and looked at his comrade in surprise. Everyone present was also completely astonished by this news. The king's subjects exclaimed. Nothing less was expected from the prince. He was the pillar of their country. The chancellor nearly burst with rage, exclaiming angrily, impossible. The protagonist continued, hiding in horror, but there was proof. Let them see the demon lord's body. The wounds on it were caused by the holy sword. Only one of royal blood could wield the holy sword, and only His Highness Yuck was there. He had witnessed with his own eyes how he had defeated the demon lord single-handedly. Yuck looked at his ally in disbelief. At that moment, Flora exclaimed angrily, what was that all about? He had defeated him. What was the point of all this lying? There was no turning back. Was he a complete idiot? He had declared this before the king himself. Yuk tried to calm the girl down, telling her there had to be a reason. The prince turned to the protagonist and said with a smile, and he hoped that reason was compelling enough to be branded a scumbag who had stolen someone else's glory, right? Cray was embarrassed and apologized to the prince for lying and for making him worry. He just thought about the Chancellor and decided it would be better to let Yuk take the credit for the victory. Flora and the prince murmured, "Chancellor?" Teredas noted with a smile, as he'd thought. Cray wondered if Yuk hadn't defeated the Demon Lord, then his position would be in jeopardy. Flora asked her comrade, perplexed, what he was even talking about. The boy continued, "Currently, the first heir to the throne is Yuk's older brother, Prince Alton. But this boy is the Duke's puppet. If he ascends the throne, the actual power will rest with the Chancellor. But thanks to this feat, Yuk's chances of taking the throne have increased." Flora remarked with surprise, "She thinks the Duke won't be too pleased?" Teretas said that if they'd honestly admitted that Cray had defeated the enemy, the Duke would have been overjoyed and would have tried to humiliate Yuk and lower his rank. The protagonist told the prince, he'd said it himself, that this man only thought about lining his own pockets. He'd also said that if he became king, he'd create a country where everyone would live in peace. So what good would these achievements do him if they simply died with him? And in his hands, they would become a formidable weapon for conquering the throne. The prince was astonished. So he lied for him? The protagonist jokingly remarked, "Besides, being a hero is nothing but trouble. It would just make things easier for him, so he'd pushed it all onto him." The prince laughed, remarking that it was so typical of him. At that moment, Flora spoke with all seriousness. Now she understood. If that's the case, she wouldn't say anything more. The girl turned to the prince and said, "Well, since he's earned all the laurels, he shouldn't waste them." She too, as a saint, would support him. Yuk sheepishly promised her he'd try. The saint turned to the protagonist and asked him if he was refusing the hero's place, what he planned to do next. The protagonist, after a moment's thought, said, "I can say the following about that. In fact, he has something he's long wanted to try. He'd like to explore the Hellish Edge, the most dangerous demon lands." His allies were astonished. Flora asked him, "Is that the land he's talking about? The borderland, where powerful monsters roam?" The prince mused, "An unexplored land that the kingdom had abandoned due to its extreme danger?" Cray said, he'd once looked into the matter and learned the following. There's an old law that says that if someone conquers the Hellbound with their own hands, the land becomes theirs. Yuk said that indeed, such a law existed, and it was still in effect. However, no one had ever managed to conquer that land. Flora asked MC, so he wanted his own territory? He cautioned, not to say it so loudly. His abilities would best manifest in a place like the Hellbound. He also thought he could create a place where everyone could hang out. Celebrities like them, his allies, couldn't relax anywhere in this country. The comrades were silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Flora said, "Well, if that's what he wanted," she had no reason to stop him. Teretas added, "He wouldn't perish even on the brink of hell. He wouldn't mind." Yuk said, "It's just a shame they won't be able to see each other often." The protagonist was about to tell his friends something else, but at that moment, the hero's assistants burst into the room. Yuk's assistant exclaimed, "They need to discuss the reception with neighboring countries." Flora's assistant shouted at her that they urgently needed to include the region in the saint's pilgrimage ceremony. Teretas's assistant told him they had a question about the recommendation from the headmaster of the Magic Academy. The protagonist looked at them and sighed simultaneously. Yuk said, "It can't be helped. For now they need to go their separate ways. It seems they'll all be very busy." Teretas said, "What a hassle." The protagonist remarked with a smile, "It's hard being heroes, huh?" Irritably, Flora suggested that the comrades tell the king the whole truth. Yuk said he agreed. It wouldn't hurt him to experience their difficulties. The protagonist was indignant. Come on, they were joking? A few days later, the MC, having inspected everything, said, "Great, the preparations are complete. It's time for him to set out." Passing the palace, he muttered that he should say goodbye to his friends, but they were probably all busy with their own affairs. And besides, he was now a simple fellow villager. It was scary to imagine how long it would take to arrange a meeting for him with the hero, the saint, and the sage. He said sadly until recently they were always together, and now they were so far apart. At that moment he suddenly noticed his comrades and shuddered in surprise. The prince spoke up. After all, he had noticed them. Teretas grumbled, "So far apart, damn him." The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, "Why were they all here?" Flora had told him, "Of course they came to see him off." She exclaimed angrily, and he was planning to slip away quietly so as not to disturb anyone, but he couldn't fool her. The protagonist answered her, confused, "But they're all busy. Are they really allowed to be here?" The girl answered him, "It was difficult, of course. But she managed to slip away, pretending to be a priestess." Yuk laughed and said, "Compared to the battle against the 4 heavenly kings, getting rid of the servants is a piece of cake." Teretas said, "They've gotten used to him. He can skip work." The prince, looking at him, said warmly, they would come to see him off no matter what. He was an important comrade and always would be. The protagonist looked at his allies, moved, and in a burst of emotion, he swept them into a hug. They wondered what was wrong with him. Cray thanked them and asked all 3 to take care of themselves. After bidding his friends farewell, he set off, his comrades waving goodbye for a long time. After some time, the protagonist set up a small camp, prepared some food, food and said it was still about 3 days to the edge of hell. That was still a long way off. Suddenly, he heard someone scream and excitedly ran in that direction. Upon arriving at the place where the scream came from, Cray noticed a cart and a multitude of wolves nearby. Without a second's hesitation, he used wind magic, the wind blade skill, and instantly destroyed all the beasts. Afterwards, he looked at the man and woman and asked if they were safe. The merchant, Granz, happily thanked him and picked him up in his cart. After a while, they set off again. MC thanked him for agreeing to give them a ride. The man turned around with a smile and introduced himself and his daughter. Rita, the merchant's daughter, said with a smile that she was pleased to meet him, and she also thanked him. The protagonist asked Granz if he was from the village of Emmer. Is this the village closest to Hell's Edge? The merchant agreed, adding that they were returning from shopping in the capital. He asked their savior how he had ended up in such a remote place. Cray replied with a smile that he was heading to Hell's Edge. If possible, could they tell him about this place? Granz and Rita were greatly surprised by this and asked him, "He's heading to Hell's Edge?" The merchant remarked that he thought it would be better to see it with his own eyes than to listen to stories. Meanwhile, in the courtyard of Altonia Castle, Duke was drinking tea. Duke Gig called out to him and said, "There he is." The prince replied with a smile that it was unusual for him to visit. Had something happened? The Duke smirked, thinking that he hadn't yet had time to properly congratulate him on his victory over the Demon Lord. Let him accept his sincere congratulations. He was their heroic savior. His father must be proud of him. However, there was something troubling him. Was it really he who defeated the Demon Lord? Yuck reacted with irritation, but hid it, and with a smile asked Gig why such a question. Hadn't the examination shown that the wounds on the body matched those from his holy sword? The Chancellor agreed, adding that he had no doubt that the corpse had been killed by him. He only asked, was it really the body of the Demon Lord? That's all he wanted to know. No one had ever seen the Demon Lord's face. Was it possible that some demon had been killed and his body passed off as the Demon King's? The Chancellor continued that, of course, he wasn't questioning his feat, but could he provide proof that his power was sufficient to defeat the Demon Lord? Yuk paused, perplexed. Judging by his behavior, was he sure he wasn't the one who defeated the Demon Lord? He was simply trying to humiliate him. The prince asked him with a smile, how could he prove it? Surely he couldn't train another Demon Lord? The Duke replied that it would be enough if he demonstrated commensurate strength. For example, how about a mock battle against 3 S-class adventurers? Yuk replied thoughtfully that he understood everything. They say that 1 S-class adventurer is equal in strength to an entire army, and against 3, an ordinary warrior doesn't stand a chance. Gig exclaimed joyfully, we could even gather a crowd and put on a grand spectacle. Everyone will want to witness His Highness's strength with their own eyes. The prince paused, understanding that the Chancellor wanted him to disgrace himself by losing to the adventurers. That would surely lower his popularity among the masses. Sadly, the Duke's assumption was logical. He truly lacked the strength to defeat the Demon Lord, but he still wouldn't allow the hero title he'd accepted from his friend to be undermined by empty intrigues. Yuke thought for a moment, then smiled as he accepted his offer. Meanwhile, in the carriage, Granz announced that the boundary was already visible. The protagonist, looking around, saw a vast, dense forest and asked the man in bewilderment, "Is this the Hell Boundary?" Exploring the Hell Boundary seemed like it would be interesting. After some time, they arrived at the village of Emmer. Granz called out to him, noting that it was already evening. Perhaps he should wait until tomorrow to reach the boundary. Cray agreed to his proposal and asked if there was an inn in the village where he could stay for about a month. Seeing the merchant's reaction, MC remarked that it seemed so. Rita happily asked him if, in that case, why didn't he come stay with them? He thanks her for the offer, but she shouldn't offer something like that to a stranger. She's still a young girl. She smiled and said it was fine. The protagonist called out to the merchant and asked if he minded. Granz smiled and said, why not? He'd saved them from the monsters. They should repay him somehow. The protagonist hesitated, wanting to object, but eventually agreed, saying it would be until he built his house. The next morning, he woke up and went downstairs. Rita greeted him immediately. She happily wished him a good morning and noted that breakfast was just ready. Please, let him have some. The MC thanked her in surprise and sheepishly said, they're even feeding him. The girl replied that that was part of their gratitude too. He tried the food and noted that the potatoes were crispy and delicious. Rita smiled. It's because the potatoes are fresh. They just picked them. Granz remarked that he'd said he was heading to the edge of hell. Could he ask what he was planning to do there? The protagonist replied with a smile that he'd come to develop this place. The merchant explained that he'd once dreamed of developing it too. After all, they lived in the borderlands, but he'd quickly given up. Rita excitedly exclaimed that the edge of hell was very dangerous. He knew magical beasts of incredible power lived there, right? The protagonist replied with a smile. Of course he knew that, but he must admit he was quite confident in his abilities. They'd seen him fight for themselves. The girl agreed with his words, adding that there was no arguing with that. It was incredible. Granz remarked that this was the first time he'd seen such powerful magic. He must have a very good talent seed? The MC smiled and replied, no. Evaluation and imitation. Those are the only 2 seeds he has. The merchant exclaimed in bewilderment. What? This can't be. These are ordinary seeds. Rita asked thoughtfully if she wasn't mistaken. And if the talent seed was bestowed by God at birth, this was determined in the church. The protagonist agreed and explained that if a person had the talent seed swordsman, then they had a talent for fencing. If mage, then they had a talent for magic. Of course, talent requires training for its development, but it's a kind of indicator of which path can lead to success. Someone with a combat seed can obviously become a powerful warrior, but in his case, Rita asked again, did he have evaluation and imitation? Granz noted that these seeds were quite common. Of course, it was unusual to have 2 of them, but still. The protagonist replied with a smile that he shouldn't expect much. He was simply a little better at evaluating objects and easily mastered imitation. The girl asked him if he was so strong even without combat talent. That, on the contrary, was even more astonishing. MC remembered with surprise how he'd told Teritas he thought he'd be of little help with his talent seeds. At that moment, the Lord had replied with a smile that a person's life isn't predetermined by a talent seed, but rather changes through encounters. And now, with a sincere smile, he said that, in fact, many more people pursue professions unrelated to their talent seed. It only indicates a predisposition, and the future depends on the individual. Even with an ordinary seed, any path can be forged through effort and ingenuity. After some time, the protagonist went outside and decided to explore the hellish edge. Suddenly, a guy named Keza ran up to him and angrily exclaimed, who is he, and how did he gain Granz's trust? Cray wondered in disbelief. Is he a country boy or something? Is he wary of outsiders? The protagonist replied that he hadn't gained anyone's trust. The guy spoke aggressively. He doesn't know what good lies he told them, but he shouldn't expect that the rest of the villagers will accept him. Especially him. They don't like outsiders, and he advises him to get out of here quickly. He'd warned him. After these words, the guy ran off. MC looked around in confusion and noticed that they seemed to dislike him. He glanced at the villagers standing nearby. They all abruptly turned away from him. The protagonist thought about it. He was most likely the first person to want to settle so close to the edge of hell. These people's suspicions were well-founded. Well, since he was planning to live here, they would be neighbors. He should try to gradually close the distance. After some time, he reached the entrance to the edge of hell. The protagonist, looking around, noticed that it seemed like an ordinary forest. He didn't sense any monsters nearby. Granz said that the medicinal herbs gathered here were the village's source of income. Suddenly, he noticed the enormous withered plants marking the entrance to the hellish realm. MC walked further and, looking around, began to notice that the plants were withered. It occurred to him that this was probably due to the overly concentrated magical energy. A person with little magical power could die simply by entering here. He thought, so this is where the hellish realm begins. Well, okay. He'll see how strong this magical energy is. Suddenly, the protagonist felt an incredibly oppressive aura and noticed that even the air had changed. This place was definitely not for walking. He heard a rustling sound in one direction and turned his gaze in that direction. Cray activated his appraisal skill and realized that he was facing a goblin with a B+ combat power, A intelligence, and a special ability, high fertility. There were several of them. He thought such low-level monsters wouldn't exist, although their combat power was an order of magnitude higher than that of ordinary goblins. Well, just right for his warm-up. The protagonist was just about to draw his weapon when the goblins turned to look at him, puzzled. MC was surprised. Had they noticed him? He'd hidden his presence. Watching the monsters rapidly approach him, he noticed they were also very fast. He drew his sword and, waiting for the right moment, swung the weapon, slicing them in half. Cray looked at the fallen enemies and said, but still, goblins are goblins, seemingly ordinary, but their speed is insane. Is it all because of the influence of the hellish edge? Perhaps the dense magical energy here increases the monster's strength. The protagonist pulled a magic stone from one of the goblins and was surprised by its size. It was also slightly larger than usual. The protagonist thought about it. It seemed mastering it would be difficult unless he did something with this magical energy. But he liked it here. He decided to explore a little more. He was amazed by so many things here. Large plants and flowers, strange little creatures, small dragons that he barely managed to fight off. After some time, he returned to the village. Rita congratulated him on his return, and he told her that he was back. The girl remarked how quickly he had come. He had been planning to see the edge of hell. MC replied that he had already gone. He added that it was a very interesting place. Rita was amazed, but it was only a little after noon, and he had already returned. Cray said a little embarrassedly, well, yes. He had collected a lot of magic stones. She could take them if she needed them. The merchant's daughter asked him in surprise, magic stones? Thank him, but they don't need them. They can't use them anyway. The only magical tool they have is a lamp, but it runs on small shards. The protagonist was surprised, right? And there's no storage? Rita exclaimed, of course not. They can't afford such an expensive item. They're common and sold in big cities, but they're in the borderlands. The protagonist looked at her in surprise, thinking that even simple everyday life on this outskirts was fraught with many inconveniences. He said, well, he'll repay her for her concern. Rita looked at him in confusion. What was he talking about? The protagonist exclaimed, "He's got something to do." Cray retreated to a secluded spot and exclaimed with anticipation, "Okay, it's time for him to get started." He activated the inventory he needed and got to work. He began drawing a magic panel. As he worked, he began to think. He'd come from the capital to master the Hellish Edge, an unexplored magical territory on the outskirts of the kingdom, and to enjoy a quiet and free life where his friends would occasionally visit. He discovered that this territory was a forest full of monsters, creating its own ecosystem thanks to concentrated magical energy. His plan was to build a house quickly, but to make the land safe, he needed more research and experimentation. He would have to stay in this village, bordering the edge of hell, for a while, enjoying the hospitality of Rita and her father. Therefore, he needed to finish this magic tablet quickly. Incidentally, it was in the creation of magical tools that he first found his purpose. When he left the village, where he had no place and had just joined the party of heroes, everyone was friendly to him, despite being a burden with mediocre skills. They protected him from monsters, even taught him to read and write, and they made him feel needed. He recalled the incident on the first day they met, when Yuk knocked on his door in the morning and asked if he was awake. Confirming this, the prince laughed at his puzzled expression and wished him good morning. He greeted Yuk in amazement. For him, completely alone, waking up with someone and sharing a meal was the greatest joy. He didn't care about defeating the demon lord, but he wanted to at least somehow repay the people who changed his life. And in an effort to be useful, he drew what he'd learned. Teridas, seeing his drawing, asked him in amazement, "Did he draw that himself?" The protagonist noted yes, but was something wrong? The sage replied in surprise, "No, he just did it very well." He added that it takes at least a year for an academy student to learn to draw such a magic circle. The protagonist drawled in surprise, "Really?" He'd simply imitated him, and gradually he began to get the hang of it. Teridas repeated thoughtfully, "Imitation." Incidentally, his talent seed is imitation, right? MC confirmed that it was, and he also had the appraisal skill. The boy noted that both skills weren't particularly effective, but perhaps it was a very good combination. Cray asked him in surprise, "A combination?" Teridas explained the synergistic effect of possessing multiple seeds. In his case, the analytical information gained through evaluation could increase the accuracy of imitation. Suddenly, a thought struck him, and he exclaimed in amazement, "Oh, really? Could he really perfectly replicate any skill just by seeing it?" The Lord couldn't believe his own guess. Teridas was puzzled. He told him that this must be why the prophet had chosen him. Cray didn't understand. He continued, if his hypothesis was correct, then within him lay a potential capable of surpassing even them. MC was shocked. He bowed before him and asked him to tell him what he could do. He thought he would do anything, just to repay them all. That's when the hectic, but in their own way, joyful and warm days began. Tetris magic, Yuk's swordsmanship, Flora's healing spells. He simply copied the power they had acquired through long years of rigorous training and attributed it to himself. Normal people would have been furious, but they willingly taught him, and that's how he copied and mastered all their techniques. He said he just wanted to be useful. Who knew that he would end up defeating the demon lord? He patted the table and said, "Okay, it's done. It's good he made it before dinner. He needs to get some fresh air." He went outside and saw Granz. He asked him if he was back. Granz turned around and asked how the reconnaissance had gone. MC replied that he'd taken a good look around and killed a few goblins. Granz got scared and asked, "Hellbound goblins?" These monsters were completely different from regular goblins. They were comparable in strength to A-rank monsters. MC thought for a moment and said, "They were about the same." What worries him is what he does if the monsters manage to reach the village. They're strong. Even one would be difficult to handle. Granz thought for a moment and said that they can't reach the village. Hellbound monsters die when they leave its borders. Cray asked in surprise, "Do they die?" Granz answered positively and said that in a week, a month at most, they die on their own. MC said they can't survive outside? Why is that? He thought, the only difference between Hell's Edge and other lands. Granz said, it's magical energy. Cray thought, magical energy specific to Hell's Edge. Monsters have adapted to this territory. They constantly absorb concentrated magical energy and use it as life force. MC said, that's why they can't survive in other places where energy is scarce. He thought, this means its elimination is a top priority. Granz said that monsters from Hell's Edge rarely go outside. Only occasionally they wander through the adjacent forest. Perhaps they instinctively understand that they cannot survive. He looked back where the forest was and said, after all, this place is something beyond human comprehension. They returned back. Rita welcomed them back. She said that she will now prepare dinner and they can rest in the meantime. Cray said, just in time, he just finished a magic tool. Doesn't she want to try it? Granz was a little surprised by his words. Rita asked in surprise, what? A magic slab, a storage area. Rita told her father that these really were magic tools. He answered positively and said they were the best. MC asked, is this okay here? Rita said he should wait. It was too expensive a gift. He said he would continue to enjoy their hospitality for a while. Let them consider it rent. She asked, what kind of rent? It was simply gratitude for saving them. He looked at them kindly and said that a magic slab was the first magic tool his teacher had taught him to make. He had said that if he learned to create such things, then he would not only be able to conquer himself, but also make people happy, because magic tools serve to make people's lives easier. He would simply be pleased if this tool helped them in some way. Rita was touched and said that they would gratefully accept them and use them. Now she would be able to cook a much tastier dinner for him too. He should show her how to use it. Cray said that she should press here and the fire will turn on. He pointed to the buttons. He continued, "The strength can be adjusted with this lever." Rita said in surprise that not only does the fire light instantly, but the heat is also so easy to regulate. MC smiled and said he was glad she liked it. Granz looked into the fridge and said, "Storage. Is it true that food doesn't spoil in it?" Cray answered positively and said that meat and fish will stay fresh forever. He said that he's never seen anything like that. She mixed the dough, then poured it into the frying pan. Granz came up to her and asked, "Is this a pancake?" Rita answered positively, saying that thick ones are difficult to make if the heat isn't regulated. Hers always either burned or remained raw. She thought they should turn out fine on a magic stove. He said, "That's it. Wow, she's already so skilled with it." They laughed. MC looked at them warmly. Granz said, "But such a good magic tool probably requires a very large magic stone. If the energy runs out, they won't have anything to replace it with." Cray said they shouldn't worry about that. There's a magic stone from a hellish goblin there now. But he'd made it so even ordinary shards could be used. He was surprised and asked, "Don't magic tools work with certain magic stones?" He apologized and said he didn't know. That's because that's all they have. MC said that's usually the case. At the moment, only he and his teacher can create something like that. Even the nobility don't have anything like that. Rita asked her father, "Is that possible?" He continued for her, "This isn't just luxury, it's the greatest invention of the century. Priceless." A scream was heard from the house. "What's wrong?" The villagers looked at the house. He said Granz was making a lot of noise. She answered positively and said that the guy who saved their lives was currently living with them. The man said they were worried he was some kind of shady character, but by all appearances, he seemed like a good person. He got angry and said he couldn't fool him. He would definitely expose him. They were using the magic tool heavily. Rita had made a lot of pancakes for the protagonist. Cray was walking through the forest and noticed something. He said he saw him. Keza was peeking out from behind a tree. He asked how he knew his name. MC replied that Granz told him. His father was the head of the local guard, wasn't he? Cray said he knew himself. Hell's Edge begins further down the line. He should go home. He shouted that he also knew that strangers needed to be watched. He wasn't going to harm anyone. Granz had told him about him, hadn't he? He could have fooled him. Uncle Granz was too kind. Keza got angry and said he needed to stop. He knew what he was up to. MC turned to him. He continued that he needed to confess. He had his eye on Rita. As long as he was alive, he wouldn't lay a finger on her. Cray was shocked by these words. He thought that now it was clear to him. This was youth. He still didn't calm down. Who was he talking to? He needed to stop. Who was he talking to? He shouldn't ignore him. MC ignored him and moved on. Keza said that he was an idiot. Had he seriously gone overboard? He remembered his words, that he shouldn't go into the forest alone, he should go home. Cray wasn't a bad person at all. She confirmed his words and said that he had actually saved them. He had killed a whole bunch of monsters in the blink of an eye. He was simply incredible. Keza got even angrier. He cursed and ran back. MC said that for him, he was a suspicious character, showing up next to the girl of his dreams, and, of course, he would be on edge. Well, for the sake of young Keza's peace of mind, he needs to quickly build himself a house and move out. But first, he needed to stretch his legs. He used wind magic and chopped 3 trees in half. Then he used his skill and thought that with water magic, he would draw all the moisture out of the wood. With earth magic, he would prepare the site. All he had to do was assemble it all with his mind. He lifted the logs into the air and stacked them together. He said, "Ready." The logs became a roof. He said, "Well, it turned out pretty well. Without the trees, more light penetrated, and you wouldn't know from looking at it that someone had been to hell." However, if it were that simple, people would have pitied him here long ago. What bothered him was that the kingdom had been trying to develop these lands since time immemorial, but it was as if no human had ever set foot here. He returned to the city and noticed the crowd. He asked if they were looking in the fields. He said he wasn't there. He asked what happened in the lake. Did he say when he disappeared? Cray asked if something had happened. No, Arzam turned around and said he was the guy who lived at Granz. Arzam was Keza's father. He looked away and said, "Here's the thing. Keza didn't come home." MC asked, surprised, "What?" He continued that they had an ironclad rule. Once the sun went down, no one was allowed to leave the village. The forest was dangerous at night, and monsters could crawl out of the edge. He used to always be home at this time, but now it was dark and he was still nowhere to be found. He said he hoped he'd just fallen asleep somewhere in the village. Cray didn't answer. Arzam ran off and said he'd search the village some more, then go into the forest. He should let everyone know if he saw the kid. MC said that the kid had followed him. He should check. He used search magic. White stripes appeared around him. He thought that inside the village he couldn't feel his aura. After all, he was somewhere in the forest. He said he'd have to go after him. Cray quickly headed into the forest, saying his search magic had a range of only 2 kilometers. Teridas could sense him from 5 kilometers away, but if the range wasn't enough, he'd compensate with speed. He'd cast the spell while running. MC saw a white flash of light. He approached it and said he'd been found. 2 kilometers away, he seemed alive. Wait, he thought he had the aura of a huge monster around him. Cray resolutely headed toward him and shouted at him to freeze and wait for him. Keiza was sitting among the bushes. He hid behind a rock and covered his mouth with his hands to keep quiet. A huge monster passed by. He thought it was a monster from the edge, and a huge red grizzly at that. Damn, why did this particular monster come out now? If his father would go looking for him, if all the villagers would help him. He imagined what it would be like if the grizzly attacked his father. Keiza was very scared. He thought that he needed to somehow escape and warn everyone not to go into the forest. He heard some sounds. Keiza looked out. He saw a monster lying down. He thought it was asleep. He headed towards it and thought that here was his chance. Keiza passed by it and was shaking all over. After he passed it, he tripped and fell. He turned to look at the bear and saw that it had woken up, most likely from his sound. Meanwhile, MC shouted his name. He saw the monster attack Keiza. Cray cursed and headed towards it. He swung his sword and cut the bear in half. He ran to Keiza, who was lying on the ground and badly wounded. Keiza barely said, "Stranger, why?" MC told him that he was looking for him. "Now everything will be okay." Keiza asked, "Okay?" He laughed and barely managed to say, "What a fool he is. With a wound like that he can't be saved." He lay there and looked at the sky. He said that, although he was the fool here, he had broken the ban over some trivial matter, and that was his business. He thought that he had dreamed of leaving the village and becoming an adventurer, but the whole world lay before him. He didn't understand why such a strong warrior, even from the very beginning, had come to this wilderness. He had everything he could ever dream of, everything he had ever dreamed of, and yet, he was still reaching out to Rita. He hated him, and yet, even though he acted like a complete fool, he had come to save him. He burst into tears, and smiling, said that he was far from him. Cray used healing magic. He said that the saint herself had taught him this healing magic. He said, "Oh gods, they must grant healing to this flesh." Great healing. A white glow appeared. Keiza's wounds instantly healed. He stood up and asked, "What?" MC asked him, "So does it hurt anymore? No more pain?" He said, "It's healed." "How so?" And he said loudly, "That can't happen. Is he normal?" He'd already come to terms with his death. Cray calmly said, "Well, he's not dead. He should be happy." He said, "That's true, but..." He said nothing further, as he was in shock. He sat down on the ground and asked why he saved him. He'd been acting like a jerk. MC smiled and said, "He found a reason for that too. He was just jealous. It happens to everyone." Keiza said, surprised and awkward, he recognized. Cray answered positively and said that he was older than him after all. "Okay, talk later. They should go home. They've already searched for him there." He agreed with him. They returned to the city, and everyone who was looking for him immediately approached them. He shouted his name. He said he was alive. Thank the gods. MC was carrying Keiza. Arzam approached them and called out to his son. Keiza said, frightened, "Father." Arzam shouted that he was a fool. "How many times do I have to tell him not to go into the forest alone?" He punched him in the head, but Cray was very shocked. He thanked him and said that thanks to him, his son returned alive. MC said, "Oh well, it's good that he made it in time." Keiza told his father that Cray had killed a red grizzly. Arzam asked in surprise, "What?" he asked. "Is there a red grizzly in the forest?" he asked. "And did he defeat it?" He said that even a squad of adventurers couldn't handle this monster. All the villagers were shocked. He asked the protagonist, "He took the magic stone, didn't he?" Cray answered positively and took out the stone. He said he didn't believe it. He said he'd never seen such stones in his life. Arzam said, "Well, that's a real favor really. If a monster from the edge wanders into the forest, they simply don't go there. They wait for the monster to die on its own. They can't hunt or gather herbs." He hugged him and said, "Well, he just finished him off for saving his son, and for the bear, no walks today." MC looked at him in bewilderment at first, and then laughed. At the same time, the catacombs in the palace. He was going down the stairs, then he walked down the corridor. He came in and said, "So this is where he is. Truly a demon lord, such an aura even in death." There was a large monster on the wall. He asks that he leave the rest to him. He swears that he will fulfill his great goal and cruelly punish the damned hero. Is something brewing in the capital too? Everyone was drinking at the bar. He said it was delicious. He said it was the best poplar drink. Keiza approached Cray and said that the village chief wanted to talk to him. MC asked, "The village chief?" The old man said that as the head of the village, he was supposed to thank him for saving Keiza. He bowed to him. Cray awkwardly said, no, he was grateful to him for letting him live here for a while. He said that he would ask for help if he needed it, if MC thanked him. Keiza looked at him and said nothing. Father and son, they were completely different. He said that he was truly grateful. Today, he returned alive only thanks to him. Keiza bowed to him. Cray said, "Wow, what commendable meekness." He said that his dream was to become an adventurer, but he was not very strong and he had no connections outside the village, so he envied Keiza, who had come from far away. He hesitated a bit and said, "Well, how is he? After his antics it will sound normal, but he asks him to teach him how to fight." He called him brother. MC was surprised and asked, "Brother? Why?" He calmed down and remembered how he spent time with Tiritas and Yuk. He smiled but said nothing. He thought, so now it was his turn to teach. He said, "Okay, but only in his free time." Rita said so he decided to teach Keiza. Cray answered positively and said that obviously he wouldn't learn everything an adventurer needs in the village, so he'll train him as best he can. Rita said, but he has his hands full already. MC said that once his friends saw potential in him, and thanks to that, he became who he is now. He would be happy to do the same for Keiza. But of course, not every day. He'll teach during breaks from mastering the edge. Let his father push him with the basics. Keiza enthusiastically agreed with him. He said that he had always wanted to ask why he was even trying to develop the edge. Cray replied that if he developed the land there, it would be his. He would invite the entire old team to his place. Keiza said that it was not necessary to climb into the edge for that. MC replied that those people would only be allowed to rest in peace there. Rita asked, the hellish edge? Keiza said that these were his friends. Cray said that this was his way of repaying them, nothing more. They looked at him excitedly. He said that now he even wanted to meet his friends. They certainly would not be ordinary guys. He laughed and said that they would definitely be surprised. A day later, the hellish edge. MC was in the forest again. He said that anyway, he should see what was in his. He was surprised because he saw 3 huge trees in front of him. He asked, what, did he take a wrong turn? That must be it. He looked a little higher and saw that the logs he had recently built were in. He said, come on, is that his gazebo over there? The trees had grown back overnight. Now it was clear why everyone had abandoned the idea of developing these lands. Cray thought for a moment and wondered why. MC turned around and thought it was in the soil. It wasn't just the concentrated magic in the air. The ground was also saturated with colossal magical power, and the plants fed on it. He said an entire patch of forest had grown overnight. Creepy. So what should he do? Cray thought. The magic was in the soil. He remembered during the journey. He remembered how he asked Teritas what he was doing. Teritas had replied that the fields here were depleted. Nothing was growing properly, so he was pouring in his magic instead of fertilizer. MC replied that he didn't know it could be used like that. Cray said, what if you do the opposite? If you suck out all the magic, then what about the plants? Whatever. A magic absorption spell. He'll reverse this Teritas technique. He needs something to destroy this drained magic. He thought, well, and then like this. 3 days later, Arzam approached him and said, Keiza told him he was building here. He wants to repay a debt. How can he help him? He was sorry he couldn't bring more people. Of them only he could cross the boundary without dying. MC said he was glad of any help. You should follow him. It's not far. He thought he didn't want to give advice to his son's savior. A loner is more than capable of this. Although he won't listen to him, he's a confident guy. He should play along until he gives in. Cray turned around and said that he actually felt a bit awkward. After all, he'd come specifically to help, and he already had everything ready. He showed him that he had built a large house on this land. Arzam was very surprised and asked, what? MC smiled and said that since he was already here, and even if he had tea, he would be his first guest. He also said in surprise that he should wait. The house was impressive, of course, but the local forest was growing faster than he could swing an axe, and it was dangerous to enter. Cray said, oh, that's what he meant. Oh, his poor gazebo. He had already solved this problem. He could show you how. He chopped down 3 trees. He pointed at them and said, first, he cleared the area where the trees had been. Arzam was shocked and simply agreed with him. Cray said this, and then he layered 2 spells. 2 circles appeared on the ground. MC said, the lower one sucks magic from the soil, and the upper one is the most voracious spell in his arsenal. The magic below is sipping the spell above. If the soil is drained of magic, the trees will stop growing normally and not as quickly. Well, that's the rough outline, but now he's launching it. He lowered himself to the ground and placed his hand. A vortex appeared where the circles had been. He said that now he just had to wait until the magic ran out. Arzam looked at it all in amazement. MC said he'd been watching for a couple of days, and the forest had stopped growing. The entire house stood on such soil. Arzam said he'd solved the main problem of mastering such brute force. Well, he'd give it a try. In that case, he wouldn't refuse a cup. The drinks for the next housewarming are on him. Cray agreed with him and said he'd worked on the interior too. They headed into the house, but suddenly Arzam felt something. He turned around and prepared to draw his sword. MC called him. Arzam said there was something there. Cray said he'd known for a whole week. If it doesn't attack, then he won't either. Arzam didn't answer him. Then he asked, is he sure everything will be okay? MC patted him on the shoulder and said, oh, come on. Suddenly, some sounds were heard. Arzam was very scared. Cray calmly said that if anything happens, he will somehow sort it out. Arzam laughed and said, what a horror. Someone was running quickly through the forest. She said that this person, who is he? If he dares to encroach on her territory, she will have to fight. Royal Academy of Magic. Professor's building? Teritas' office. He asked, is there an intruder? Flora answered positively and said that 4 days ago someone got into the castle catacombs. It seems nothing is missing, however. Teritas answered positively and said that special magical artifacts are kept there, but now they could only have been broken into because of... Flora finished the sentence for him, saying the demon lord's body, but it's just a corpse. Is there any magic left in it? It only didn't rot because of the time-stopping magic. Teritas thought for a moment and said, maybe the thieves know something they don't. She said she'd rather burn it to be on the safe side, but the mere mention of it would make Conrad reactivate. He asked sarcastically, what? She wants to destroy some kind of evidence. She got angry, screamed, and said, they defeated the demon lord, they saved the world. Why can't they keep quiet? Teritas said that defeating the demon lord is just a victory over the demon army. History teaches that people will start slaughtering each other next. Humanity is doomed to fight forever. Flora said that the council is still putting pressure on her, They are demanding a wedding with Yuk. Trying to turn her into a political pawn, she has no strength. How she wants to meet MC again. All thoughts are about her distant friend. Keiza swung his sword and cut it in half. MC said he was getting pretty good at it. He replied that he thought he was starting to get the hang of it. He asked him how he was. Was he really leaving the village and going to live in the Hellbound? He needed to stay with them a little longer. Krei replied that he had come up with an idea, of course. He had already built the house. He didn't want to inconvenience Grands anymore. He shouldn't slack off in his absence. Keiza said he wanted him to teach him personally. It was so much easier and faster that way. MC turned around and told him that next time he would evaluate his progress and give him some advice. Hellbound, Krei's house. He put down a chair and said that the furniture had made it more comfortable. He had made all the furniture from local wood, but he needed to find a bed somewhere. He couldn't just lie around in a sleeping bag on a bare bed all the time. In the future, he needs to provide him with food, build a guest house, and make this one properly habitable. Maybe even build an outdoor bathhouse. Krei sighed and thanked the ancient law traders. The entire forest was his to use, a gift from fate, no doubt. The only downside was that it was a bit difficult to get to the village. He'd like to instruct Keiza more often, but he trudged back and forth through the forest every day, and he didn't have the strength. If only he had a road, it would be easier for him, and Keiza could come to him himself. MC thought about it and said he should stop. Why not just build one? He needed a bed and crops anyway, and he could ask the merchant about the road. Krei left the house. They were sitting at the dinner table, and Grands mentioned a road through the forest. He had one idea bigger than the other. MC said he wanted to cut down part of the forest and pave a direct road to the edge. But the forest feeds the village. There's hunting and gathering there. He wanted to ask for advice. He replied that it was a good idea, and that, if the village chief allowed it, everything would be fine. He should talk to him tomorrow. Rita missed him. She'd be happy if he could easily get to their place. Rita called him over, embarrassed. Krei asked her if that was true. She blushed and answered awkwardly, but really, something interesting always happened when he was here. If the road is built, will she be able to visit him? MC smiled and answered positively, saying that he was planning to build monster-repelling artifacts for the journey, so it would be safe to walk. Rita was delighted. Krei continued, but she should still take someone with her, some guy for backup, like Keiza for example. Rita asked, Keiza? He must have been practicing this a lot just now. He could probably be relied on. MC happily thought that he should take action. The next day, the village chief asked, wow, a road in the forest? Krei asked, is it possible? The village chief replied, surprised that there were no problems with that. Besides, there used to be a road there, a relic of a bygone era, so to speak, and it could be used to build a path. The hunters and guards knew where it was. He should ask them. MC said guards. He thought he'd ask Arzam to show him then. Krei bowed to him and said he understood. He thanked him for his approval and helpful tip. He was very grateful. The village chief replied that it was nothing, not enough for saving Keiza. The village of Emmer was originally founded by a vanguard of edge exploration. He was trying to realize the dream their ancestors abandoned, and as their descendants, they were simply obliged to support him. MC was a little surprised and thanked him. Krei and Arzam walked through the forest. He pointed his finger forward and said that they had arrived. He should take a look there. Those were the remains of stonework. MC sat down and asked how old it was. He replied that no one knew. It was like this when he was still a kid, definitely over 100 years old, but it was still easier to walk them through the overgrown thicket. Krei said, well, they should get started. There were 2 tasks. They needed to cut down the trees and pave a new road, the same thing he did to build the house, but this would be easier first. After that, MC used his skills, windblade, telekinesis, and press. Arzam was shocked by him and said, well, he's a monster, of course. The road is almost ready. Krei said he'd lay the stone when he cleared everything. He told him they needed to go forward along the old road to the very edge. Arzam, surprised, asked him, what? Was he planning on doing everything today? MC answered positively and said he should show him the way. After some time, they paved the road. Arzam said he really had finished it in a day. Krei apologized for keeping him up until nightfall. Arzam said it was okay. You don't see something like that every day. Keiza could get there on his own this way. He was eager to see his house. He'd definitely be happy. MC agreed and said training would be easier now. He was growing by leaps and bounds, by the way. He was just about to take him to the next level. Arzam agreed and said his movements had improved. Krei said, by the way, he had a question. Had he checked Keiza's talent seed? MC thought that if he wanted to be a true adventurer, it was better to know what his talent was for. Otherwise, he could spend his whole life missing out on opportunities. Arzam asked again. Talent seed? He hadn't checked, and he doubted anyone in the village had. They check it at the church with a special artifact, and the nearest one is in the county capital. It's too far away and expensive. Krei said it was out of the way. After all, he thought, well, he didn't even know him until he met the guys. He said that maybe he could check it himself then? Arzam looked at him and said, well, he's not against it, of course, but would he drag him to town himself? MC replied negatively and said he'd just make an artifact to test. Arzam was very surprised by this and asked, what? Krei replied, well, only the church is allowed to have seed checkers, and the manufacturing method is classified, but his mentor taught him how to make them, so no problem. Arzam said he was tired of being surprised. He needed to tell him what he couldn't do. Won't you be ready tomorrow? MC replied positively and asked if he wanted to check it with him too. He asked, is that possible? Cray replied, why not? If anyone in the village wanted one, they could come. Will he let everyone know? Arzam replied positively and said he'd tell everyone when he got back. He had to go. It was getting dark. MC agreed with him and said he needed to stop. He used magic and lit the way. He said that even though the road was paved, it was better not to walk through the forest in the dark. Arzam thanked him and said, but this is just too romantic. Isn't he who he thought he was? Cray said he could walk him home by the hand. Arzam said he'd lived through it all in a day, paved the way, possessed such magic, and even knew how to make church artifacts. Who the hell was he? MC replied that he was a dreamer determined to conquer these lands, but otherwise he was just a villager. The next day, Cray said that he'd certainly invited those who wanted to come, but the whole village, everyone had gathered to test their skills. Arzam scratched his head and apologized to MC. He shouldn't have. He'd only hinted at a free test, and that was it. Cray said he didn't expect the whole village to show up. He said, well, it's free then. She replied that she was curious to know what his talent was. Arzam asked, where is that artifact? MC pulled something out and said that here it is. He asked, is it an object? It looked like a regular iron plate. Cray said it was a magical payment covered in mithril. More precisely, he added a data output circuit. Arzam stopped him and said there was no need to explain it. He wouldn't understand anyway. The village elder asked, will they let him be the first? They turned to him and called him. MC said he needed to place his palm there. He'd wait a bit, and the text would appear. The village elder did so, extending his palm to the plate. Arzam asked, is it the same in church? Cray replied that only the priest there sees the results, but with him, it's the opposite, only the person themselves. By the way, he recommends everyone be careful about telling about their seeds. You never know who might use this information for what, and nobles might even summon you against your will. The village headman agreed with him and said he'd heard similar stories. The girl with the title of saint was forcibly taken away by the church. He agreed with him and said he'd warn everyone himself. MC said he was counting on him. The artifact Cray had crafted worked. An inscription appeared. Leader. The village headman said, is that leader? He'd never heard of such a thing. MC happily said, wow, that's a rare and useful title. Very fitting for the village leader. The village headman looked at him and asked, is that so? Cray said someone was saying he could easily become a general in the army. If that had been determined at the temple, he'd been pestered with offers from the military and nobles, but now he's unlikely to be in danger. The village headman thought for a moment and said, wow, such a great gift in such a frail body. MC asked if he regretted not learning about this when he was younger. The village elder replied negatively, saying that if he'd known about it then, he wouldn't be living such a peaceful life now. He was glad he'd ended up in his place. It was nice. Cray said he understood everything. His question was tactless. He apologized for it and bowed. The village chief said he shouldn't worry, and it concerned only him. He was grateful to him with all his heart for giving the young people hope for the future and faith in their abilities. MC thought it was honorable, and now he understood why he was the leader, and the fact that the village survives in these harsh conditions is surely due to him. Cray said they should come one at a time. A long line formed in front of the table. He asked, the cook, so he knew how to cook, and he was leaving it to his wife. She said that now he would start. He asked, the teacher, that doesn't suit him at all. He said he should shut up. She said that, although it is true, he writes excellently and explains well. Granz held the artifact in his hands and said, a diplomat? So he is a good negotiator? Come to think of it, he rarely has problems with deals. MC said he also had a strong talent, capable of achieving a high position in the army. Arzam placed his hand on it, and a sign appeared that said, Guardian Warrior. He called Cray and asked what Guardian Warrior meant. MC said he'd asked them to keep quiet, but they were telling everyone. It was a powerful talent. Still, it was much stronger than ordinary warriors. He'd expected a combat talent. A Guardian Warrior not only controlled his aura, but could also protect and use protective magic. Arzam was very surprised and asked, can he cast magic? No way, but for a Guardian Warrior sounds pretty good. Cray said he was still glad everyone was having so much fun. A real ceremony usually took place under terrible tension. He asked him if he was serious. MC answered positively and said he'd seen it a couple of times. He thought Yuke was often called upon as a good luck charm. They believed that in the presence of heroes, his son would surely receive a great gift. He begged him to be present. Then the priest said something like patience or digging. In short, if you get a bad seed, it imprints, and complete horror begins. He said that for nobles, it's the end of the world. Cray said that sometimes the heir of a house is deprived of the right to inherit right there and then. Arzam said that this is cruel. MC said that family is just an indicator of talent. He thinks it should be taken more seriously. Just like the people in this village. Arzam laughed and said that they are just fools. They do not understand the importance. Keza called Cray and said that it was finally their turn. Rita said that she would have managed without it, but her father insisted. MC said that only they remained. They need to put their hands here and wait. Keiza put his hand and began to wait. Cray thought at this time, but it seems strange. Maybe it is still a coincidence. Keiza's talent is blade sorcerer, and Rita's is a master of magical instruments. Keiza asked if a blade sorcerer was something good. Rita said that she had never made magic tools. He asked MC if his talent was normal. He looked at him and was a little surprised. Cray was shocked and said nothing. Keiza called him. MC apologized to him and said that he was thinking, so he should start with Keiza. He was cool. A blade sorcerer is the highest form of a magic swordsman. He asked, the highest form? Cray said that a magic swordsman is a hybrid of a mage and a swordsman. Both have their highest forms, an archmage and a swordmaster. And a blade sorcerer is a hybrid of the highest forms, that is, a swordmaster and an archmage. To be honest, he himself has never seen such a thing. Keiza was very surprised and said that he didn't understand anything, but it sounded cool. MC said, well actually, it should be. Cray thought that he decided to just check just in case there's something like that. It's probably a good thing they learned about it here. If a blade mage had appeared in the capital, it's scary to imagine what would have happened. With such talent, it's a straight path to generalship. He won't talk, otherwise he'll know and stop trying. He told her that hers is self-explanatory, the highest form of magical toolmaker. Rita asked him in surprise, so she can make various tools? The protagonist replied, that too, but this talent has far more potential. For example, creating artifacts, alchemy, potion making, magic circles, and much more. If she were to find a use for it, she could make various things, and her father would sell them. The girl, astonished, exclaimed, what? She's making something. She couldn't even believe it. The protagonist asked her if she wanted him to teach her the basics. He knew how. Rita thought for a moment, then sheepishly replied, no need, she's doing just fine. MC looked at her, confused. He had to ask her if she was sure about this. He wouldn't force her. After some time, the protagonist told Case that they'd have to change his training plan. They needed to add magic as well. The boy, incredulous, exclaimed in admiration, he's going to cast magic! This is so great, he wants it so much! He told his father, passing by, that he'll be a wizard. The man looked at him in bewilderment. The protagonist remembered all the villagers and thought, strange, everyone had two good seeds. Rita, Keiza, the village headman, Granz, and Arzam, all outstanding talents. And the rest of the villagers would be a hit in the capital too. It's not like an entire village has a talent seed. It's generally accepted that talent seeds are a pure lottery, but what if there's some condition for obtaining them, and the residents of Emmer have unknowingly fulfilled it? When the protagonist arrived at the settlement, he overheard two adventurers talking. One of them said that if he'd known about this earlier, he'd be rolling in money in the capital by now. The second laughed and remarked, well, he'd say the same. The MC was surprised by what he heard. Although, no matter how everything is arranged, the fact is that the entire village is covered in nuggets. He was just about to write a letter. He could consult with Yuck. While he was fighting demons, most of the nobles had joined the first prince's party due to his absence. Extra talents wouldn't hurt him. He's a man of free views, so there wouldn't be any problems. Keiza looked at the protagonist in surprise and remarked to his father, who was lost in thought again. Arzam wondered if he was planning something crazy again. The girl turned to Keys and said that MC is both a strong warrior and a pleasant person. He, Keiza, is lucky to have such a mentor. The boy exclaimed smugly. Oh yeah, Arzam said, there's a fear he'll become something more than just a mentor. A few days later, the protagonist arrived at his land, the Hellish Edge. He thought, before continuing his exploration, there was one mystery that needed to be solved. That red grizzly that attacked Keiza. Why did he even leave the edge? The local creatures feed on highly concentrated magic and rarely venture outside. The locals told him that goblins sometimes get lost when separated from their group. But for a creature like a red grizzly to emerge outside was a first, which meant something unusual was going on there. Back then, when the monster attacked Case, if he delayed even a moment, it would have been too late. Had he built the road in vain? He couldn't allow it to happen again. He needed to find out the cause of this anomaly. Meanwhile, the prince read his letter. The protagonist, having defeated a small boar, exhaled and said, "This will do." Having prepared himself a snack, he thought to himself, "He's already gone quite deep. How big is this boundary?" Suddenly, he felt a presence behind him, someone watching him. It was Charlotte of the Veda tribe. She hurled a spell at him, but the protagonist blocked the attack with lightning speed. He looked into the crevice in the tree, where the blow had just come from, and said, "Maybe that's enough? Let whoever it was come out already." When Charlotte came out to him, MC thought in surprise, unearthly beauty and long ears, an elf. He smiled at her and asked, "What about monster meat?" The girl asked him, puzzled, what he'd said. She thought he'd just made camp, but it turned out he'd been luring her. Well, if that was the case, she'd probably join him. Charlotte sat down at the table with him and began to eat. The protagonist, sipping his tea, stared at her, wondering if she'd just cast a spell at him. And now she was acting like they were having tea in the palace. He didn't expect to run into an elf in the realm of hell. The protagonist asked the girl if they all lived in Elphira, the land of the holy tree. Charlotte quipped, "Who's talking?" He should forgive her. But she'd been watching him this whole time. The sight of a man strolling along the edge as if through some park, it wasn't even a surprise. It was a terrifying anomaly. The protagonist chuckled, noting that she'd mentioned being followed, meaning she wasn't going to beat around the bush. He exclaimed, "Oh yeah, they haven't introduced themselves yet." MC told her his name, adding that he was a humble guy who wanted to develop these lands. A villager, basically. Charlotte introduced herself in return, saying they lived here. The protagonist, surprised, asked her if her entire clan lived in the Hellish Edge. She told him, of course, a little further on, deep in the forest. And this forest, contrary to popular belief, was a much more lively place. The girl added that among those she knew, elves, spirits, and beastmen lived here. And they say demons dwell in the very depths. The protagonist was astonished. Even demons? That couldn't be true. Although no, it all made sense. There are many countries in the world where non-humans are enslaved. The eternally young elves and the most resilient beastmen are especially prized. And demons are, needless to say, death awaits them in any country, as they are considered the natural enemies of humans. So the races persecuted by humans sought refuge and found their haven on the brink. Charlotte smiled and remarked, "What a perceptive man." She added, of course, life here is hard, but humans and monsters, they simply chose the lesser of two evils. At least they know what to expect from monsters. He says he's trying to reclaim these lands. They were doing the same. Each race reclaimed their territories in its own way, and eventually, each found a new home. The protagonist thought in surprise. They'd already done what he wanted, creating a peaceful place for his comrades. Although, since so many people already lived here, wouldn't there be clashes over territory? To them, he, a human invader, invading their painstakingly built paradise. Now it made sense why she'd been watching him. Charlotte had said, development, then? His aura was so terrifying that she'd assumed he was an assassin sent to exterminate them. MC was indignant. What was she saying? His aura was terrifying. He was of course always ready to repel an attack, but he had no intention of attacking anyone. The girls seemed to agree. And yet, to the elves, he was the embodiment of threat. Couldn't he see? The countless spirits gathered around him. The protagonist looked around in bewilderment and asked her, confused, why he could see them at all? Only elves had that ability, and even then, only those with a spiritualist ability. He thought that only elves could command spirits. Humans simply weren't given such a power. But Teritas had mentioned he could see them. He might have believed him, if he'd actually been an elf. The protagonist asked Charlotte, what's so bad about that? The elf replied, once upon a time, there was a human girl who was similarly haunted by spirits. They called her the spirit's lover. Whenever she gave in to her emotions, she'd experience downpours or scorching heat. Cray asked her, surprised, did the celestial spirits change the weather to suit her mood? It was awkward, to say the least. The girl continued, and it all ended with her blowing up everything for kilometers around, leaving behind only a giant crater. MC remarked, now that's dangerous. Charlotte asked him, does he now understand why they considered him a threat? A man who could explode at any moment was wandering near their house. The protagonist sheepishly apologized to her for scaring them. He wasn't exactly eager to explode himself. Was there any way to fix that? The girl took off her bracelet and gave it to the protagonist. He asked her, what is it? The elf replied that it was a spirit bracelet. With it, even a person could ask the forest spirits to fulfill any request. The MC, surprised, clarified, so if he asked them not to follow him, they would listen? Charlotte said, exactly, and she would ask him to do it right now. The protagonist understood, so that's why she came here today? She told him, you could say that, although she wasn't sure he would agree. The protagonist assured her that he needed it himself and would use it. Thank her for this gift. The protagonist took the bracelet in his hands, and Charlotte said, now that's done, she'll go. MC hesitated for a second, but then asked her if he could ask her a question. Had she noticed any changes in the edge lately? Besides him, of course. He explained his interest, saying that a red grizzly had just come out the other day and attacked his ally, and he had to destroy it. The girl said thoughtfully, I see. Indeed, shortly before his arrival, the monsters had begun acting strangely. The protagonist thought he'd known it. He asked, does she have any idea why he did it? Charlotte told him, alas, she had no idea. He should forgive her. She couldn't help him with that. MC noticed, of course, and apologized for keeping her waiting. The girl was about to leave, and he addressed her by name and asked if they'd see each other again. The elf looked at him with interest and said, who knows? Well, if he can survive here. She activated her body enhancement and soared upward, leaving Cray. The protagonist, watching her go, thought she reeked of bloodlust. She acted friendly, but she wasn't going to trust him just yet. And that bracelet too. Since they were neighbors, it would be nice if they got along. Meanwhile, Charlotte sat down on a tree branch and thought about the protagonist. He was indeed a dangerous adversary, but it seemed he had no intention of harming them yet. However, they had to remain vigilant. It was best to eliminate the threat beforehand. She descended to the ground, thinking that she actually knew the reason the grizzly had left the brink. A creature far stronger than he had simply appeared in his territory, and he had been forced to flee. But they had nowhere to run. She approached a huge tree, recalled their most powerful adversary, and said irritably, as if that weren't enough, now this man had appeared. But why did disasters come one after another? Meanwhile, the village was in turmoil. The residents were discussing an important event. Arzam, passing by, asked one of the villagers what all the noise was about. The man replied that they said a guest had arrived from the capital, supposedly to see Cray. Arzam, surprised, asked him, who is it? The resident answered him that he didn't know. He only caught a glimpse of what looked like a priestess, and a very beautiful one. It was Flora, who had come to visit the protagonist.